With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us. Whoa, sorry, camera's a little off center there. There we go. Sorry, I don't know how that happened. I must have bumped it on my way past, but thank you so much for being with us on this Thursday afternoon. We appreciate you being with us, whether you're joining us via Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, any way that you're watching us. We do appreciate you making this show a part of your day, and we do actually would like to apologize for the late start. I know we're starting about a half hour later than we normally do. There were some severe technical difficulties that we were having to deal with off screen, but luckily it looks like we've got everything resolved and we should be more or less going the way that we're supposed to right now. So with that being said, it is of course Thursday, and we all know why Thursday is important. It's because it's time for our weekly update from Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. Good afternoon, Becky. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with you again. I can't believe how fast these weeks fly by.
Well, I'm sure they fly by even faster now that we have 3 legislative days instead of 2.
Yes, it has been super long days every day, and just drinking from the fire hose again, I guess is a great way to put it.
Well, I'm sure that you feel that even more than most of us, but despite having 3 legislative days, and I think this was actually the first week that took place, we've actually not had that much movement on bills. There's been a lot happening, but we haven't had an awful lot of things pass. So
Right.
why do you think that it was kind of the gears were turning a little more slowly this week than normal?
Well, I think on the floor they seem to be going a little bit slower, but in the committee meetings they were going fast. A lot was happening, and again, just so your listeners know, we're not keeping track of every bill. There are like 900 bills out there right now, and we have our little niche of different things that we look at. A lot of family kind of stuff, some education stuff. So some of our bills just kind of are in a holding pattern right now. But the biggest thing that happened was an exciting day on the Senate floor today with the abortion bill. Can I give you an update, kind of play by play, what happened there?
Oh, by all means. I heard there was quite a bit of excitement when it comes to that.
Yeah. So for everyone to know, the HB 314 is the Alabama Human Life Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
It will ban abortions for every reason except the life of the mother. And it was actually written so that it would be a challenge to Roe v. Wade, because Roe v. Wade basically says the fetus is not a person and is not protected by the Constitution, therefore you can get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And so this bill will actually be a direct challenge to it. We're going to say the fetus is a person. So there are no exceptions except the life of a mother. And the reason that's in there is because when you have the life of the mother, you're going to end up killing 2 people. If you allow the mother to die, the most likely, these are very extreme, rare cases.
Well, they're even rarer now that medical science has advanced.
Yes.
Because I know that I did an interview with a OBGYN that had been practicing medicine in that specific field for, I believe, 23 years when I did the interview with him. And he said, and he worked in Boston, one of the biggest hospitals in the country. He said, not only have I never heard of a case where aborting the child would have saved the mother's life, I can't even think of a scenario where that would save the mother's life. So yes, what you're talking about are insanely rare circumstances.
Yes. And in most of those cases, the mother's life is in danger. And if she were to die, most likely the baby would die as well.
Right.
So they sort of, try to minimize the amount of death, and they take the baby so that the mother can live instead of having 2 deaths. So that's why that provision is in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it passed the House floor last Tuesday, as we talked about last week, and then it went to the Senate.
Sure.
It has to go through the Health Committee and the Senate. So yesterday it went through the committee, and lo and behold, Senator Whatley from Auburn, a Republican, offered an amendment for rape and incest. And as heartbreaking as that scenario would be, I really, that is an awful thing. And if someone is brutally raped and then having to carry the child, I understand. I haven't lived that, but that would be an awful, awful thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the purpose of this bill is to prove that the person is a live human being. So by putting this amendment on the bill, which was accepted and passed out of committee, that waters down the reason why we're trying to do this bill, and it reduces our chances of challenging Roe v. Wade.
Right,
So,
and that's the thing that people really need to understand. Even if you're somebody that believes that those exceptions ought to exist, you're still running into the problem of the whole reason this bill was contrived and put together and went through the House and tried to go through the Senate the way that it was specifically to act as a challenge to the decision Roe v. Wade. And adding these exceptions greatly reduces the ability of the bill to serve that purpose.
Right. So, Caleb, basically, we would say that when you add an amendment like that, you're basically destroying the bill's purpose to establish the personhood of an unborn child. It's inconsistent to say that the unborn child is a person, but if he's conceived as a result of rape or incest, he's not a person.
Right, because
that's going to create a difficulty in court to argue that.
Right, and to explain how in the legal system that would be something that would make it much more difficult for you to make that case based on that law. Let's say, for the sake of argument, if you were to apply that exact same logic to somebody that was outside the womb, because if the whole purpose of the bill is to assert that the person in the womb is indeed a human life that is worthy of equal treatment of those outside the womb, and there's all of a sudden an exception that is added in there for rape, then the, of course, logical question is going to be, so a 5-year-old that was conceived through rape or incest, that person's life is not something that we should consider equal to other human life. And so that's the reason it really makes the bill incredibly ineffective when you're talking about its original purpose, which was to challenge Roe v. Wade. When you look at it from that scenario, even if you believe those exceptions ought to exist, you have to acknowledge that that would make the bill essentially useless for the original reason it was put together.
Exactly. Which, yes, you said it very well. So what happened today is that bill, it passed out of committee yesterday, so now it has this exception on it. And they came to the floor this morning, and it was around 10 o'clock. They gavelled in the Senate and did their little prayer and pledge and all their little local bills they needed to do, and then they got down to business.
Sure.
And, of course, there was a lot of debate from the Democrats. They didn't, they just started right off, we don't want to accept this special order calendar that's going to talk about this bill today. They have to vote on a special order calendar to allow them to be able to talk about this bill, and they finally passed that. And what had happened was it was time now to vote. They have what's called the BIR. We have a constitutional amendment that says you cannot pass any laws in the legislature until you pass the budget. Well, the legislators figured out how to get around that, and they have what's called the budget isolation resolution. So before every bill now, if the budget's not been passed, before every single bill, they vote on, hey, we're going to set the vote aside. Does everyone agree to set the budget aside so we can vote on this bill? Okay, so that's what the BIR is. So they go to vote on the BIR. So that now, once they get that done, they can go to vote on the regular bill. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's part of the process. So now
it's how the sausage is made, but I understand.
Yes, exactly. But what had happened was the sponsor of the bill quickly asked to table the amendment, that amendment, for the rape and incest. And it was quickly seconded. And if you table an amendment, it means you're going to strike it out. You're going to remove it out. table sounds like you're setting it aside, but really you're stripping it from the bill. And there was a quick second, which not many people heard, and all of a sudden, the bill is back to its original version. And all hell broke loose in that chamber.
I can
the
imagine.
Democrats cried foul. This is not right. Because if the Democrats, on a normal, if it would have gone, I want to table this motion, and then someone would second the motion, then the people who are against it could raise, 3 people just need to raise their hands. And if they raise their hands, it says this motion can't be tabled. Well, it all happened so fast, no one really even had time to raise their hand. So the Democrats were upset. Everyone in the gallery up above that was watching, all of our hearts and adrenaline start rushing. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to start a fight down there. There's yelling and screaming, and it was kind of crazy. But the Democrats, Vivian Figures, she is a staunch Democrat, but she can be very reasonable when she talks. And she said, hey, I have a problem with this. We know you're going to pass this bill. We know you have the votes. We get it. But we want to have you respect us enough to have the debate. Let us go through the process. We don't need any shenanigans like this.
Honestly, just from my initial hearing of this, I think that's fair.
I do too.
I don't
really
think that's
do too.
unreasonable at all.
No, and it was a little sneaky the way they did it. I think they felt they had to do it that way. But Cam Ward, a Republican from Shelby County, got up right after her and said, guys, I'm pro-life. I support this bill. I'm going to vote for this bill. But I agree with my Democrats. This is not the way to do it. We need to have full debate. We need to have a voice vote. We don't need this rammed through. And
right.
Del Marsh.
And any Republicans, sorry, I didn't mean to interject here, but
no, go ahead.
Just real quick, any Republicans that were upset about the way that the new gas tax was just shoved through so quickly without any debate, they should have the same sentiment now. As much, I'm about as pro-life as a person can be, but the way that we win matters. And the way that if we're going to do this, we need to do it the right way and make sure there's no legal challenges to it later.
Right. Well, Del Marsh, the Senator pro tem, he's like the head guy in the Senate.
Right.
He got up right after Cam Ward, Republican also from Anniston, and said, guys, here's what we're going to do. We are going to adjourn for the day. And of course, you have to make a motion, but he said, here's what I want everyone to do is I want everyone to go home. I want you to talk about this with your senator friend or, with your constituents. And we're going to come back at 4:00 on Tuesday and take this up again. And then, of course, they adjourned through the proper how they do that, have to second the motion and all that.
Sure.
But basically, right now, the bill is in its original version, which is great. But here's the problem. The Republicans, who far outweigh the Democrats, can pass this bill. But about half of the Republicans want the amendment and about half don't.
Have you been able to speak to any of the Republicans that are in favor of the amendment, and what is their rationale on it?
Yes, I have. And they just feel like, for one thing, they feel like their constituents don't understand the situation. Their constituents don't understand why they have to pass a clean bill. So they're voting because, a lot of people want to have compassion on those victims who have a baby that way or conceived that way.
Sure.
And so they do want to serve their constituents, and they feel like they are going to get beat up if they are so staunch that they won't even allow that provision.
So in other words, and I'm trying to be as generous as possible here, but when you boil it all down, they are worried about their jobs.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one of them I talked to said, look, I am pro-life and I don't believe in abortion, but if my daughter was raped, I would not have a problem with her having an abortion. Which, I mean, that's his view, and that's where he was coming from. And all I could basically say was, but it's a person. It's still a person. It's not the baby's fault,
Right, and where I stand on that, but I think that's the thing. You kind of just highlighted it. There's two different ways to have this debate on this amendment. First, you can have it on the purpose of the bill itself, which adding this amendment would basically make the bill null and void, at least for the purpose by which it was created. the reason that we put it together. But then there's the second front that you can have the same argument on about the merits of this amendment, which is, since there's already a provision that protects in cases of the life of the mother, that if a medical procedure has to go through to save the mother, then that would be acceptable under the law. But when you're talking about rape and incest, this is still, if you believe that it's life, if you're pro-life, if you believe that this is another human being, you cannot take out the punishment or the consequences of this heinous act that took place on an innocent bystander.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, for me, it's easy because I haven't been raped, and I don't know how horrible that is.
Sure.
So of course, it's easy to stand back and say, "Oh, this is." I still, my best friend I grew up with, her mother was violently raped, and that's how she was conceived. And the amazing thing was, she is a strong Christian, married 27 years, has 4 kids of her own. When she was about 20, she got to meet her birth mom. And so much healing came from that. And I just keep seeing it that way. God can work anything for good, even these awful, awful situations. But anyway, Caleb.
Yeah, and real quickly, just to throw in my 2 cents on this as well. One of the things that you see consistently throughout the biblical narrative over and over again is that God takes some of the worst situations. I mean, literal genocide, for example, is how Moses came into power and came to be the leader of Israel. And so that's one thing that we have to consider as well, is that, yes, rape is, of course, a brutal, horrible act. And sometimes when children are conceived that way, that's obviously not anywhere close to God's design, because, of course, he wanted a man and a woman that are married to be able to conceive children that way. But even when a horrible act like that takes place, the results can be a great blessing to many people. And so that's something that we have to consider in that as well, is that you don't take out your anger or rage, which is justified at the action of rape, on an innocent bystander, in this case, the child that was conceived through that process.
Yeah, good point. So what our call to action is, what we're really, really trying to do, is to help people understand why this exception is just not the right thing to do for this bill. We want to be able to say this really is a human life, so that it will challenge Roe v. Wade. And they're going to come back at 4:00 on Tuesday and take this up again. And I just need everybody to talk about it at church this weekend, to talk to your friends, to explain why we need a clean bill. If you really want to get rid of abortion, we must pass a clean bill. And you know what? If this challenges Roe v. Wade and is overturned, we can stop abortion in America, which is what I am praying for. It's such a big deal. So Eagle Forum of Alabama will be putting out, I've got a video that will be finished tonight. It's just a little 2-minute, here's the deal, here's what you need to know, with all of our other information. If people would share that, pass it around. The senators are back home for the weekend in their district. So it's just time to let everyone know, even those that are on our side, the senators who are not going to vote for that amendment, we need to let them know, hey, I've got your back. I'm glad you're doing the right thing. Thank you for doing the right thing. I think a lot of them are scared, and they just need to hear in a polite way what y'all want them to do, and that is to pass the bill without an amendment.
Right, and that's something that you need to be aware of, because, like you just pointed out, you'd say roughly half of the Republicans are very hesitant to pass this thing without the amendment. And so just because your senator happens to be a Republican, do not assume that they are against the amendment. And so don't take that for granted. You need to communicate with them. And
don't assume that they're for the amendment, because if they don't get a lot of positive, it goes either way. I mean, some may fall towards the amendment this weekend, some may come away from the amendment. So, we need to push them all away from the amendment, whether, no matter where they are today, they could be completely somewhere else by Tuesday. So keep working on them. And in the link, and Caleb, I'm happy to send you links for you to put on this video yourself, how to find your senator. And then if you know who your senator is, I have a list of names with their numbers. Like I said, they should all be home, but their work numbers are listed, so you can leave them a message. Their emails will be there, so you can send them an email. This is a huge, huge deal. Of all the things we do, in the State House this year, this is it. This is the most, in my opinion,
I
anyway,
agree.
and from Eagle Forum's opinion, this is it. And we need everyone to just get active. It's so easy. For those of you who've never called before, you just call, hey, Senator Chambliss. As a matter of fact, he's the one carrying the bill. He's my senator in Prattville, and I would just call him and say, Senator Chambliss, please pass the bill 314, the abortion bill. They'll know what you're talking about with no amendments. That's what we want, and that's all you need to say. You don't have to go into some big long thing. Just pass it with no amendments.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's the thing that you need to be aware of. Like you just described the situation, even if you're somebody listening right now that has never done that, never called a representative or emailed them or anything like that, remember that with this bill specifically, because I know a lot of people don't do that because they feel like it doesn't make a difference. With this bill specifically, the hang up that a lot of senators are having with it is specifically they think that the constituents will not back it. So this is, if there was ever a example that you could come up with of a bill that constituents calling in and voicing their opinion on this can make a difference, this would be that bill.
Yes. And for those of you who've never done that, just to help you not be afraid of it, it's probably going to be a secretary that answers the phone. If not a voicemail, it'll be a secretary. She is not going to debate with you. She is not going to say, well, why, and go into some big, long thing. She's just keeping a little tally. Okay, this person says yes. This person says no. So it is so non-confrontational. If you're terrified and you're scared, all you need to do is say, please support the abortion bill with no amendments. Thank you for your time. I mean, that's it. You don't have to go into anything long and drawn out, and especially if you're shy and that terrifies you, which it used to terrify me.
Right. If you can
believe
that.
Simple. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Caleb, I got to tell you something funny. I testified in 3 committee meetings this week. Yesterday, I testified in the our free speech bill, campus free speech bill,
right,
and also against the yoga bill. They want to teach yoga K through 6.
So you didn't have an official opinion on that the last time we talked about it. So y'all are against the yoga bill now?
We are, and
okay.
Here's the thing. Well, we can go into that later, but
sure.
And then today I testified against the lottery bill, and. I go on Fox News live in front of millions of people, no problem. I can do events, stand in front of, thousands of people, no problem. You put me in front of the Alabama Health Committee or Education Policy Committee, and my voice is shaking, my hands are shaking. There's 10 people in front of me. I'm like, what in the heck is going on? Why am I feeling this way? And I think part of it is that I know some people in the audience that are behind me that I can't see are probably totally against what I'm saying, and so I'm intimidated or something. I don't know, but it is hilarious. It's something I hope I'll get over soon. But so all of you out there who think, I make it look so easy, it is pretty easy, but you don't need to be scared of this, because I used to be scared, and calling in and telling them how to vote or how you want them to vote. It's really simple, and they're not going to question you on it. You can just call in and tell them what to do and thank them and hang up the phone. So
right, and that's the thing. I don't want to get way too off in the weeds here, but just coming from my perspective, when people ask about how to get active and that kind of thing, I said the main thing you got to remember is that we have this perception that people in elected office are just incredibly informed on the issues and really smart and scrutinize everything we say. They're people just like you. They don't know these things perfectly. No human being. I mean, this is my job. I do it for a living. I don't know everything about every issue, not even close. So and just remember that whenever you talk to elected officials about stuff like this.
Remember that too. Yes, because they don't have staff. There's a very select few,
right,
the very high ups that may have one person doing research for them. They've got 500 bills coming at them, all dealing with the biggest array of subjects you can imagine, and they cannot be experts, and they're not. So they do rely on us to tell them
absolutely
what we know and what we want them. It's our involvement really, really is important, especially at this level. Now, when you go to Congress and the Senate, they do have staff that help them research things and write papers and all that kind of stuff. But here, so many times it's the citizens that are the experts on some of these things.
Right, and I actually prefer that system, but yeah. So just everybody be aware of that and remember that they're going to take that vote at 4 o'clock, you said, on Tuesday. So just
Yes.
between now and then, try to get in contact with your senator and notify them about that. Was there
Yes.
anything else that we needed to talk about right now?
Well, let me just say one thing. If
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
want to watch, the Senate does have a live feed camera. The House does not have a camera. They do have audio, so you can listen when the House is in. But the session, the Senate, you can actually watch. So, right on Tuesday, sorry about that, Tuesday at 4 o'clock, you can watch from home or your car or wherever. You can watch or listen to what's happening in the Senate. The debate, I'm sure, will be robust. It will be very interesting to watch what happens with this amendment. I'm sure they're going to offer it again. It is a great way to see government in action. I mean, I enjoy watching the process.
Sure.
I think it's fascinating. But so if people can watch that too, and I can send you that link if you want to share that, especially maybe on your Monday broadcast or Tuesday broadcast, you could get that in your little
shoot me a reminder
button.
and I'll include that link on the Tactics Facebook page and Twitter feed. So
okay. And other than that, though, marijuana bill was debated in the Senate this week, but it was put on hold.
Right.
Carried over is what it's actually called. It was carried over to the call of the chair, so it could come up again next week, possibly on Wednesday or Thursday. I kind of expect it to come, and I expect that lottery bill in the House to probably come next week sometime. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that's something I know they want to try to get done this session. So.
Oh, by the way, I wanted to ask you about this too. I heard that the Born Alive bill made it out of committee today in the House.
Yes. So Jenny Shaver, representative, she did offer a bill, and I forget, did we talk about this last week? Is a Born Alive bill, if a baby survives an abortion, that medical facility...
I don't think we talked about this one. I think we sort of mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah. It really kind of happened fast. I think the other abortion bill was sort of taking all the oxygen out of the room.
Right.
But this bill did pass the House Health Committee, and it passed the House on the floor, if I'm correct. And I think it's in the Senate Health Committee.
Oh, okay. See, last I'd heard, it just made it out of committee in the House. I didn't know that it had passed already.
No, I think, well, you know what? I better check on that. I do think it passed. I thought it passed the House floor. I could be wrong. I'm sorry. Take that with a grain of salt, because now you're making me think.
Well, double check us on that. But, but the report that I read was from probably about 6 hours ago. So it's very possible that it did move on to the Senate.
Then it must not have yet. Okay. Yeah, you got to keep me straight on some of this stuff.
Hey, I get things wrong too. Like I said, there's just so much information all the time.
The campus free speech bill that we are very happy with did pass out of committee this morning, so it could head to the floor anytime. I mean, it's in the basket waiting to be called up from the floor. So human life bills are still just kind of making their way around, haven't been voted on yet.
Okay. I know there was a bill. I don't know if you guys have an official stance on it or not, but is there any word on the religious exemption bill for vaccines? Because I know that one was a hot topic today.
Well, this is great. I'm so glad you're bringing it up. There was a bill that I was aware of that is kind of a database keeping track of people's immunizations. I wasn't real happy about that, but I saw it yesterday or day before, kind of put it on the radar, but didn't pay close attention. Some woman from Birmingham called me this afternoon and said, hey, do you know there's a bill with religious exemptions and to get rid of the religious exemptions? And I was not aware that bill had actually been dropped and was in process.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I found confusing about it, because I saw that just today. It snuck up on me too. And I read the entire thing from beginning to end, and it was very vague on something, and maybe you can help explain this to me. I couldn't tell if the way that it was worded, it was saying that there will be no religious exemptions for kids that want to attend public schools, or there will be no religious exemptions for children born. In other words, it kind of sounded like, with the language that it was using, that it is going to mandate children get vaccinated regardless of whether they want to go to a public school or not. And
here's what that's a good question, and that's something I would talk to the sponsor about. I was kind of surprised at who some of these sponsors were. Will Dismukes from Prattville Good Christian guy. I'm
great
really
guy.
surprised. I'll be making him a call tomorrow to find out what his reasons were. And I've got some questions about the bill itself. But
Sure.
What this says in my reading is that the religious exemption is completely deleted. So the only way you can get out of a vaccination is for a medical reason that a doctor has actually provided. An authority figure has given them an excuse. And now that bill I was telling you about, the database bill, or, the keeping track of who, I'm thinking if that's in effect and everyone has to be saying their vaccines, then this religious exemption is going to show if you don't have your vaccine. It doesn't say anything about public schools in this bill.
See, that's why I found it so confusing, because the way that they were kind of wording it in the reporting, it was saying public schools, and then I read the bill itself, and I don't think that it mentioned it, at least specifically.
Right, but I think public school, now take this with a grain of salt as well. This is my thinking, is that the public schools have a requirement, and now with this little database keeping, they're going to know who's immunized and who's not, and now they can keep you out of public school. I'm thinking this is a backdoor to keep people out of public school who do not have, or make them, if they're going to go to public school, they have to have a vaccine. And I think that database is going to play hand in hand with this bill. Personally, I need to talk to my boss. She's been out of state this week. I'm pretty sure for this religious exemption, she is going to be, and our board will discuss this. I think this is one that we're going to get behind and try to stop. But if not, personally, I will take off my name tag and my job and lobby against this bill, because I believe, that we should have the right to exempt our children from vaccines if we want to. I think parents need to be in control of that.
Right.
So.
And I want to preface what I'm about to say with this. I'm very pro-vaccination. I'm still alive today because of modern medicine. I just came through with chemotherapy. So I'm not somebody that's anti-modern medicine, anti-vaccines. I have all my vaccinations. All my siblings did. I'm very pro-vaccine. However, if this bill is specifically saying that every child born in Alabama has to be vaccinated regardless of what their parents think about it, then absolutely no question, I'm completely against the bill. I believe that if government can control the needle in your arm, they can control pretty much everything else about you. Now, if we're talking... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's my thought exactly. I agree with you 100%.
Now, if we're talking about public schools, even though it does make it a little bit different, I kind of see the point that they're saying that public schools are not a right, they're a privilege of the citizen of the state. And the state does run the public schools, ergo we get to have at least some stipulation over the requirements of what you have to fulfill to be able to use this government privilege, to use this facility. Then you don't, in my mind, get into a liberty question. But I still have some hesitancy about saying whether or not your religion teaches this or not, we're not going to allow you to use the public schools because of the vaccination. And so that one, I think, becomes a much more sticky subject. But if we're talking about just requiring vaccinations by law, regardless of whether you go to public school or not, totally against that.
Well, we'll see how this goes. Hopefully we can talk about this more next week, because I will talk to Will Dismukes and some of the others on the bill who are sponsoring the bill and find out what their reasons are, for bringing this forward.
Sure.
So hopefully we'll have some answers on that next week. But thank you again for having me on. And we only have a few weeks left, really, probably 4 weeks, and we'll be done with this. 3 weeks, possibly. But
well, we always appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us, Becky. Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. Thank you so much for being with us.
You bet. Thank you, Caleb. Have a great week.
Have a great week. All right. As always, a pleasure to have Becky on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start a new segment, by the way. Just had this last week. It's a new segment called Out on the Town. I don't know how many of these I'll be doing. For all I know, this is the only one, but it's just me riding around town talking about things, so hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
All right, here we are. So you guys remember last year, one of the things I talked about in a segment called Straw Wars is how the liberals, despite no scientific evidence or backing whatsoever, believe that somehow they are saving the sea life by banning plastic straws. In response to this, Mellow Mushroom has started giving out paper straws as opposed to plastic straws. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how effective the paper straws are with the most difficult drink to drink, a milkshake. Let's see how this stands up. All right, so first of all, I got about 2 sips out of that, and the paper stuck to my lips. This thing does not work too well. Boy, it'd take you 2 hours to drink this with this.
Well, see, I'm using plastic.
That's John from Millbrook, by the way. He's
I
the one
don't care.
driving.
I think they use plastic because that's the best thing to use.
This thing sucks. Well, actually, it doesn't suck. If it sucked, I'd be fine with it, but it doesn't. This milkshake will melt before I finish this. All right. Experiment over. It's biodegradable. All right. We're going to fix this now. There we go. Good old petroleum-based plastic straws. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Oh, that's so much better.
I got a question about this.
Oh yeah?
With the paper, aren't they concerned about the trees, having to cut down the trees to make the straws too? Is that not a...
Well, that's one of the points that I made. It doesn't matter what you make the straw out of. You're expending some kind of resource.
Well, yeah, because we all live here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't matter what you make any product out of. You're expending some kind of resource. Mm-hmm. And that's true of straws or anything else. Well, I tell you this. Just based on this little experiment, I know that I saw that Disney is planning to go completely paper straw by 2020 on all their cruise lines and all of their amusement parks. I contend that Disney World is not the happiest place on earth if I can't drink a Dead Blame milkshake while I'm there.
But I will, to their defense, say one thing.
Oh?
You can take a pocket knife in. So help me.
That's something.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, so even though this went about the way I expected it to, paper straw experiment failed miserably. I imagine if I had left it in there much longer, it would have dissolved. I had a buddy the other day that went to a place that used paper straws. He said he had to order 6 different straws throughout the course of his meal because they kept dissolving on him. Which I'm sitting there thinking, you can't tell me that using 1 plastic straw is worse for the environment than 6 paper straws. I mean, that's just common sense. Anyway, all right, thanks, guys. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my milkshake.
Welcome back. Hopefully you did enjoy that, and we'll try to do a few more of those segments, and we've got some new stuff on the horizon. Real quick before we go any further, we are currently working on some stuff behind the scenes. It may unfortunately result in us having to miss a few episodes. I hope that doesn't happen. I'm working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But just full disclosure to let you know what's going on sort of in the background. I actually have a second job that I'm going to be taking up next week. And I don't want to give any details yet, but I'm going to be moving because of that. Still going to be here in the city of Montgomery, still going to be in the river region area. So don't worry about that. It's just that we may wind up actually recording the show in a different studio just for convenience sake. And because the News Radio 1440 studio is great, it's a radio studio. It's not really built for video. And so we're trying to come up with a way to make a studio, give Tactics Radio its own space, a place where people can go and actually do some video recording. And so we're just working on that right now. And we've got a few other segments, a few informational segments that we're trying to get off the ground and try to get that up and running. So there's a lot going on. It takes a lot of work, and I'm pretty much doing it by myself. Well, not pretty much. I am doing it completely by myself. I don't really have any help in this area. And so it's taking me a little while. We may wind up missing some shows next week. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if that's something that unfortunately will have to take place in order for the show to grow. Like I said, trying to avoid that. Don't think that it'll interrupt the show schedule, or at least not more than one show at a time. But it is something that we're looking into. If anything, we should be up and running by Monday. We should have a show tomorrow. I don't see there being any problem with having a show tomorrow. So this is all preliminary stuff. We just don't know yet. And I wanted to give you a warning ahead of time that we will keep you in the loop about our show schedule and if there's anything that's going to be interrupted with that. So that being said, let's go back to some more local news, not necessarily dealing with the House or the Senate, but it turns out that in an interview, and this is reporting from AL.com, that Jeff Sessions has not yet ruled out a 2020 run. So Jeff Sessions, the former occupant of that Senate seat, is considering running against Doug Jones to reclaim his former Senate seat. So there's a couple of things that I really think that we need to observe from this. First of all, I thought that Jeff Sessions ruled out running completely. Maybe I just imagined that, or maybe he just said that he was very hesitant to say that he would, but I thought that he actually had ruled out a run. I mean, maybe I'm just making that up in my head or misremembering it or something, but I remember doing a story where Jeff Sessions was saying, I'm probably not going to run. I thought that he had completely ruled it out. Maybe that was just the impression that I got or what, but now he's saying, no, I'm still considering it. I haven't ruled out running in 2020. So now the question becomes, do you think that he would do well in the Republican primary and then in the general? And do you think that he would be a good senator to return to that old spot? I have talked to a lot of people in the state of Alabama that are diehard Trump supporters that I think incorrectly blame Jeff Sessions for the Mueller investigation. They blame Jeff Sessions for a number of other things. And we even saw from the Mueller report that Donald Trump really did blame Jeff Sessions for a lot of things that were not his fault. And I think, and I stand by this to this day, treated him completely unfairly. I thought Jeff Sessions did exactly what an attorney general ought to have done in that particular position. I think there's no question about that. Now, I really like William Barr, and I think the past couple weeks have really shown that William Barr is 100% deserving of the attorney general's spot and that he's very good at it. I don't know if he's actually as good as Jeff Sessions, but my point is, whether or not I like Barr has no bearing on whether or not I think that Jeff Sessions did a good job as attorney general. However, there are some really diehard Trump people that anything Trump does is perfect. He's never made a mistake in his life. And because of that, Trump didn't like Jeff Sessions, ergo, I don't like Jeff Sessions. I've heard that same attitude repeated in the state of Alabama many, many times. And I like some of the things that Trump has done, but his treatment of Jeff Sessions was not one of them. And the reason that I think that this may or may not be a factor is I've heard very different, and I don't know if I could quantify in raw numbers how often I've heard this, but there are some people that take the position of, oh, Jeff Sessions is a terrible person. I was so disappointed in him and he should never hold public office again. I mean, there are people now that are diehard Trump supporters that absolutely hate Jeff Sessions and never want him to hold any kind of office again. And those people obviously would not vote for Jeff Sessions. But I've also heard another stance on that. I've also heard some people that are very loyal to Trump and really like Trump and were big Trump supporters even very early on in the primaries that have taken a very different position on Jeff Sessions. They still don't assert that Donald Trump did anything wrong, but they do say, well, Jeff Sessions was a great senator but a terrible AG. Now, again, I disagree with that. I think he was an amazing AG. I think that he did exactly what he should have done in the situation with Russian collusion, and he did a lot of great things that had nothing to do with that as the Attorney General, specifically when we're talking about matters regarding immigration. But when we're looking at Jeff Sessions, there are those people that say, oh, he was a great senator, I just thought he was a bad AG. I just really didn't like the job he did as AG. I think that Jeff Sessions could make the case to those people that he is somebody that is worthy to return to his seat in the Senate. That those are people that would at least consider voting for him. I'm not saying they would vote for him, I'm saying they would consider it. And then there are also a lot of people like myself that are very pro Jeff Sessions and think that Trump handled that wrong. Don't hate the president, don't hate his agenda or anything like that. I just think that he was wrong. Now, the Democrats, they're going to vote for Doug Jones, but they're going to vote for Doug Jones no matter who wins the primary. So I don't think that that's really a factor even to be considered. So if that's the case, the question then becomes, in a Republican primary in Ruby Red, Alabama, that really, really likes Donald Trump. Trump has the highest approval ratings in Alabama of any state in the nation. And we do kind of flip-flop back and forth with West Virginia, but the point is we're either first or second pretty much every poll. Can somebody that Donald Trump really doesn't like, can he be the senator? I think that if somehow Jeff Sessions can get Donald Trump's endorsement, which I kind of doubt that he could, if he gets Donald Trump's endorsement, then yeah, he absolutely wins that primary. Because he's got really good name recognition. And there's no question in my mind that he would be a good senator. He'd be a conservative senator. He always was. He was always Alabama's conservative senator. And I think that he would be good at it. So I think that if Trump endorses him, he probably wins. If he doesn't, I think that it's going to be kind of an uphill battle. Because there are so many people that really don't like Jeff Sessions because of the fact that Donald Trump seemed to not like Jeff Sessions for a very long time. And because they ended their relationship on such a sour note, I think there are a lot of trumpets, in other words, Trump loyalists, that are not going to vote for Jeff Sessions, but we'll see where we go. We'll see if that takes place. I think that he would be a good pick, but I think that even for somebody like me, who doesn't have a problem with the job Jeff Sessions did as Attorney General, needs to ask themselves this question. Even though Jeff Sessions is a great conservative, he had an amazing record, not quite Mike Lee or Ted Cruz levels, but as far as conservative voting records go, he did have one of the higher ones in the Senate. Sessions was a very good senator. And so because of that, now I have to ask the question, even though I really like him, is there anybody better in the field? Are we going to see Bradley Byrne be as conservative or more conservative than Jeff Sessions? Same for Tommy Tuberville. Same for, I would say Mo Brooks, but Mo Brooks just recently announced that he's not going to run again. So same for Arnold Mooney. I mean, you have to look through each of the candidates and ask yourself, is he going to be better? And another thing that I think is important too, as much as I love Jeff Sessions, man's getting kind of up in years. And so I think we also have to ask ourselves the question, would it be better to get somebody that is going to be at least as conservative or possibly more conservative than Jeff Sessions, that is a little bit younger and will have some time to establish himself in the Senate? Is it time for some fresh blood? I don't know. And this all may be a moot point because Jeff Sessions may decide not to run. He hasn't ruled out a run, but he also hasn't said that he is running. At this point, I just don't know if these questions are going to be relevant because we don't know if he's going to run or not. But I will say this, my initial thinking on this, and again, this is just my first gut reaction, not something that I've mulled over a whole lot because, again, right now I don't think that it's important to do that just because we don't know for sure that the man is running. But if that were to take place, my gut reaction is, while I would have no problem with voting for Jeff Sessions in the general election, I mean, there's no question he would be light years better than Doug Jones. I do have to sit there and ask myself and sort of evaluate, I don't know that Mooney or Ziegler or Byrne wouldn't be better options, if nothing else, just because I think they'll be as conservative as him and that they will be in the Senate longer. They will have more staying power. Now, I'm not somebody that believes in lifetime appointments. I would like to see somebody go in for 12 years. You get 2 terms as a senator, and then you're done. That would be my ideal situation. But nonetheless, just looking at this field, I do have to ask myself if Jeff Sessions is really still the best option. I think he's a good option, and I wouldn't at all have a problem with him being the nominee and voting for him. But in the primary, that's not really what you're asking. The question is, who is the best candidate? Who is the most conservative candidate? Who is the candidate that is most going to represent your values on the Republican ticket? And so it does change the parameters of how you ask yourself those questions, at least a little bit. And I did want to mention something else that happened to me today. So I was out having lunch with my dad, and we were down at a Mexican place in Millbrook, which, by the way, it's right there on the interstate, El Cerrito. Just give them a little free plug because it's a really good restaurant. Got really good nachos. I had the chorizo today. Excellent. Really good place to eat. Right up there on the exit if you turn right, getting off of I-65. So just a little free plug for them. But Dad and I, we don't always talk politics, but today we just happened to get on that subject. And there was a guy that came up to us afterward, and he had been listening in on our conversation, which is fine. Some people would get upset or consider that rude. I didn't. This was a super nice guy, and he was just enjoying hearing the conversation between the two of us, and we were talking about politics. So we talked about gun rights, and we talked about a couple of other big issues, and he could tell that we were conservatives based on the way that we were talking about it. And one of the things that he said, and it was really the first thing that he brought up, because he sat and spoke to us, or he stood there and spoke to us in the parking lot, I don't know, maybe about 10, 15 minutes. Guy's named Rodney, super nice guy. And he started talking to us, and the first thing out of his mouth, he said, I don't like the way this country is going, and I remember having family members that fought and bled for this country, and now we've got a bunch of young people that are wanting to vote for socialism and destroy everything that I love about it. And you guys know that I'm not somebody that thinks that Trump hung the moon and everything that he did was right, but as I was riding home, I really started to contemplate that, and I thought about he's in the same position that an awful lot of the people that voted for Trump felt that they were in. They kind of felt like their back was up against a wall, and that they had been just wailed on by the left, culturally, people calling them racist, bigots, homophobes, hate mongers, all these other things, and they were tired of it. They had had enough. And that was not something that was unjustified. All these unsubstantiated things, because he sat and talked, like I said, he stood there and talked to us probably about 10, 15 minutes. And this was not a guy that was a racist or hated people. And he wasn't malicious or anything like that. He's just saying, I was used to the country being a certain way. And kids having respect for their parents, and families staying together and living together with one another, and kids not acting up in class or being disrespectful to other adults or their teachers. See, that's the thing. He heard us talking about politics, and what he gathered from that, which I don't think was an incorrect assessment, was the way that we stood on society, which highlights that there is a very different worldview between the left and the right, and that you can usually identify somebody's politics just by listening to what their core values are. If they're pro-family, if they care about respect and authority, and there is a reverence there for religion and for God, 9 times out of 10, maybe not every time, but a very healthy amount of the time, that is going to be a person on the right. And that is because, as a general rule, your values and what you value in society itself determine what your politics are going to be. And really the message that he was trying to convey is that my family made sacrifices to keep this country free from things like socialism. They were fighting in Vietnam against communism, against socialism, against Marxism. And now there are a whole bunch of people that not only are unwilling to make those kinds of sacrifices, they want to open the doors and let the demons in. They want to make the country a socialist country. They want to take the teachings of Marx and apply them to the United States. And if that was the case, what was the point of my family going through all those sacrifices? What was the point of my family losing blood and lives to keep this country from being swallowed up by socialism? And so this is one thing that I would present to those that are on the left. Even if you hate Donald Trump, think that he's a horrible human being, think that he should never be elected, can you at least see where the guy is coming from? And I'm not talking about Trump, I'm talking about guys like Rodney. The millions of Americans that felt that their back was against the wall, that they were losing their country, and that they wanted to change everything and essentially make the sacrifices that their family experienced, that their family fought and bled and died for. They want to not just nullify that sacrifice, but basically say that they were in the wrong for fighting against that. They're saying that guys like that, just working class guys that are trying to provide for their family, that they're the monsters. They're the racist. They're the thing that we actually should be fighting against. So yeah, you can understand. I'm not saying that it's justified. I'm just making an observation here. You can understand why that person would look at a guy like Donald Trump, not exactly a pillar of virtue. Nobody should suggest that. And say, you know what? This guy is finally fighting back. This guy is finally saying the stuff that I think about. Somebody's finally listening to me, and they understand that this country is in great peril, and they're willing to punch back at these people that are trying to change the country. Can you at least understand why that guy has a pretty strong feeling about what the left is trying to do to this country? Trying to drag it into socialism? Can you understand why there was that correction, and I would even argue an overcorrection? The reason does boil down to, when you're attacking this country, when you're attacking the way that this country does things, and I'm talking about going back all the way to the fundamental roots, the Constitution, the things that our country was founded on. When you're attacking those things, it's like you're attacking the man's family. It's like you're attacking the sacrifices that they made. And so you can understand at least where he's coming from. And by the way, I would ask that people on the right apply the same logic to people on the left. Because as much as I disagree with the left, I mean, I literally argue with the left for a living. That's my job. So I'm not somebody that is saying that the left is right or that their conclusions are correct. What I'm saying here is, on the right, we understand that there is something inherently good about America. And yeah, we make mistakes, and yeah, we get things wrong occasionally. And yeah, there's some really bad things in our history that we have to atone for and that we have to apologize for, and we can admit that was wrong. We get that. But fundamentally, at its core, America as a whole, there is something intrinsically good about the values espoused in our Constitution that started the revolution in the first place. And that's something the left seems not only unwilling to admit, they try to say the exact opposite. They try to say that America was founded on racism and bigotry, and the whole thing is rotten from the core, and we have to get rid of all of it and embrace socialism. That's what a lot of people on the left are saying. Not all, but a lot. And they're saying we need to cast off all those things that made us great. And there's regular people, like the guy that I'm talking about, and millions of other Americans that are saying, no, there is something intrinsically good about that. And so if you understand that is the perspective that they're coming from, it makes it a lot harder to hate that person or just dismiss them as, well, they only voted for Trump because they're a racist. They only voted for Trump because they secretly hate black people or hate Mexicans. See, once you understand that, and you meet somebody like that, and you understand the reason they did what they did, it has nothing to do with racism. It has nothing to do with trying to keep women in their place or anything like that. The guy just felt like he was losing his home. He was losing the sacrifices that his family made. And you understand that decision-making process a little bit better. So, in reverse, people on the left, they feel like there are a handful of very wealthy people at the top that get special treatment. Now, why do they feel that way? Because it's true. They feel that way because they see CEOs of corporations and big companies have these business practices and get special treatment from the government, like GM, who got a massive auto bailout. Things like that. And they see that and they say that's unfair, and that's the reason that they vote the way that they do. A lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Or they feel as though minorities or women or some group has been marginalized, and it's been marginalized largely by the right, and because of that they feel as though there is systematic oppression going on, and that's the reason they vote for the left. Now, I think that they're wrong on that, and I'll point out the statistics to back it up. I'm just saying that typically speaking, that is where the origin of their political alliance is. They feel like something's been done unfairly, that people are being oppressed, that this is something that has been going on for a long time, that there's a large group of regular working class Americans that through no fault of their own are getting a raw deal. Now, that's not an assessment I agree with, but I understand that for the average rank and file Democrat, we're not talking about elected officials. I'm talking about specifically guys that live out in Wisconsin or Oregon or some of the blue states that are just working class people just trying to take care of their families just like the rest of us, that they feel as though that is what is going on. And so because of that, they voted for the left. Now, I disagree with that assessment. And another thing, too, they blame those circumstances on capitalism because they think what capitalism is, and I know because I've spoken to people on the left, and this is their idea of what capitalism is. It's an incorrect view, but the point is you can understand why if they think that's what capitalism is, that's why they think capitalism is bad. They think what capitalism is a government that gives handouts to big businesses and gives lots of money to rich people, hoping that that money will kind of trickle down into the lower classes. Now, that's a completely incorrect view of what capitalism is. That would be cronyism. And actually, it would be kind of close to mercantilism. But the point is, it's not capitalism. But that's what they think capitalism is. And part of the reason is because our government has been doing junk like that for a long time now. And so when they hear that America is a capitalist nation and we have a free market system, which is largely true still, we have one of the freer markets. I wouldn't even say the freest market, but we have one of the freer markets in the United States. And then they see stuff like that happen to where giant corporations and big banks will get a bailout, but regular Americans don't. You can understand why they feel as though capitalism is broken. Again, that's not capitalism, that's mercantilism or cronyism. But the point is, that's why they think that capitalism is bad, and so they try to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The point is, the vast majority of average Americans, they just want their families to be provided for and everybody to get a fair shake and to be viewed as equal under the law. That's what they really want, most of them. There are some that want a bunch of handouts, and they're wrong for wanting that. Even though, again, that motivation is they feel as though people have gotten a raw deal, and so it's only fair if we take from the people who have been taking from them for a long time and redistributing it back. Again, that's a wrong assessment, and I can explain in great detail why it's a wrong assessment. But they feel as though that is what has been happening. And so you kind of understand where they're coming from. The reason this show is called Tactics is because I try to teach you debate tactics. I try to teach you how to have productive conversations with other people about difficult issues. This may be the most important thing that I can tell you, at least from a perspective of how to have a good conversation with someone who disagrees with you on a difficult topic. Try to look at it from their perspective. It's something that's very simple. It's an easy concept to say, but it's very difficult to do. And it takes years of practice to get good at it. But start trying at it now and you'll be pretty good at it on down the road. When you're having a discussion with somebody, if you disagree with them, try to see it from their perspective. Try to understand why they came to that conclusion. Try to understand why they have if they have a visceral reaction to something that you say, try to understand why they have such a a strong reaction to it. And that's going to go a very long way in not helping you necessarily win the debate. But what it is going to go a long way in doing is helping you actually convince the person, or at the very least help them respect you. Because if you can argue from the standpoint of seeing it through your opponent's eyes, then you will be able to craft arguments that are far more effective. You'll be able to appeal to their sensibilities and appeal to their policy stances in a way that they will see as productive. And it will also instill in them a sense that, okay, even if I disagree with that person, they care enough about me and they care enough about my stances to listen and to try to present their arguments, present their point of view in a way that I can understand and that I can kind of get where they're coming from. And I think if everybody did this at least a little bit more, we would have a way better country. And I'm actually about to show you an example of people not really doing that. And I include, unfortunately, people on the right on this. I don't think that he handled it horribly. I think that there was a better way to handle it. But nonetheless, we're going to do that as we go to the daily dose of stupid. Okay, it's okay, there we go.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
So today's daily dose of stupid is kind of the opposite of what I was just talking about having productive conversations. And no surprise, it comes on cable TV. I've said this for a long time. One of the problems that I have with some of the cable news shows is you just get a couple of talking heads on there and they just start yelling at one another. I'm not saying that there's never a good place for that. I'm not saying that discussions can't get heated or get very passionate. I'm just saying that as a general rule, that doesn't really help anybody. And it doesn't really change hearts and minds. And so this is an example of that, specifically on a topic we've spent a lot of today's show talking about, on abortion and the personhood of the child in the womb. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of dissect this, and I want you to also, when you're going through this, think about the arguments and the points that they're making, but also think about what would have been a more productive way for them to have had this conversation. So this is on CNN with Chris Cuomo, and he has a CNN contributor, two CNN contributors on. He has Rick Santorum, who of course is pro-life, and he ran for president. He came very close to being the Republican nominee. I think he finished second to Mitt Romney. So former senator from Pennsylvania. And then he also has Christine Quinn. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this clip.
I think perverting fact patterns, perverting realities, and trying to demonize what people do. You guys make it sound like this is cheaper than condoms. This is easier than condoms.
Right.
So just go abort your babies. These are painful decisions for these women. These are things they live with for the rest of their lives. Yeah, I know, and they think about it, and they think about it in a way that you never will, Rick. So you're projecting all these emotions and sensibilities on ethics on people in a decision you'll never make.
And Rick, let me just say,
help and support. It's not in your body. Christine, last word to you.
Yeah. Let's be clear here, Rick. With all of your distortions and horrible tales, I answered it numerous times. When a woman gets pregnant, that is not a human being inside of her. It's part of her body. And this is about a woman having full agency and control of her body and making decisions about her body and what is part of her body with medical professionals. Those are the facts, and that is the law of the land.
Listen.
And they can do whatever they want to that.
This is about a woman's
so they can
body.
name the baby.
Listen.
All right, so you can see there, not necessarily a productive conversation, but we're going to break down some of the points here. And what I ask you to talk about, or what I ask you to think about beforehand when it comes to having these kinds of discussions, I want you to remember that Rick Santorum, really great guy, somebody that I've actually met him right here in the studio. Super nice guy. I think that he's really good at what he does. He was actually one of my first choices for the for the president. He was one of the people that I supported. I really would have much rather him run than Mitt Romney. He may have even won. I don't know. But so this is nothing against Rick Santorum, but I don't think he handled that the optimal way, especially considering that he's outnumbered, that he's got two liberals there because they try to bring on a liberal and a conservative when clearly Chris Cuomo's also a liberal. So it's just two liberals shouting at a conservative. But so Chris Cuomo is sitting there, and this is where I think that the conversation could have taken a much more productive turn. If he had looked at it through their eyes and looked at it from the perspective of the woman that is going through the process of making a decision to have an abortion, I think that he probably would have come up with this point, and it would have been a much more productive conversation. So they've gotten into this really heated discussion about heartbeat laws and laws that are supposed to circumvent Roe v. Wade, which is hilarious that they said that so nefariously. It's like, what they're really trying to do with these heartbeat laws is to get around Roe v. Wade. And Rick Santorum's like, well, yeah, that's the whole purpose of the heartbeat laws. They're like, we got him. And Rick Santorum's like, no, that's exactly what we were trying to do. Nobody denies that. You heard with me and Becky Gerritson earlier in the show, we were talking about that. We're like, well, the bill was crafted specifically to get to attacking Roe v. Wade. That's the whole point. We're trying to ban abortion. We're not hiding the ball here. That's what we want. We want the end of abortion. But nonetheless, so this takes place, and I want you to notice at the very beginning of that clip, one of the things that Chris Cuomo does is he makes an emotional appeal, which is not a great form of appeal. Obviously, logical appeal is a superior motive of persuading somebody if you're looking at the strengths of different kinds of appeals. But he tries to make an emotional appeal, which I think is not altogether unfounded. He says, Rick, you'll never understand what it's like for a woman to have to make that kind of decision. He says, you guys always try to paint this as, well, this is cheaper than condoms, which, by the way, it's not. Condoms are far, far cheaper than getting an abortion, and abortions are very expensive. It says, and we'll just go ahead and abort the baby. First of all, I don't know of any conservative that actually takes that position, but that's the way that Cuomo tries to represent it, because Cuomo's obviously very pro-choice. I mean, for goodness sake, his brother is the guy who signed the bill into law to abort a child up until the point of birth. This is not somebody that is this is not somebody that sympathizes with the pro-life movement. But nonetheless, that's what's going on here. Even though he's supposed to be some kind of objective journalist, he's going on and he's talking about this with Rick Santorum, and he makes this appeal that, well, these women are going through a traumatic experience. This is a decision that affects them. It affects the way they live. It affects who they are. And they have to live with that decision for the rest of their life. Do you know why that appeal is powerful? Because it's true. It is. I concede that. Here's the question that we should be asking, though, because I actually agree with Chris Cuomo on that. I know, shocker, I feel like the world's about to explode, but I'm actually agreeing with Chris Cuomo on something. Here's the question that nobody asked, and I think it would have been a very different conversation if Rick Santorum had asked this question. All he would have done is had to ask, okay, Chris, I agree. That's not an easy thing for a woman to go through, obviously. The question is, why is it difficult? Why is that a difficult decision for a woman to make? Because instinctively, every human being knows that's a baby. The reason that this is a decision that she has to deal with for the rest of her life, and there are women that continue to have problems sleeping, they have problems with intimacy, and I'm not even talking about sex, even though that's part of it, but I'm talking about emotional intimacy with partners from then on, because they have so much guilt that builds up in them from their abortions. This is a common thing, and it happens with a large percentage of the women that go through abortions. They do have guilt and remorse, and it's a difficult decision for them to reach. Why? Because they know inherently it's wrong. A lot of them still make the decision to go through with it, and a lot of them don't. But the point is, Chris Cuomo is asserting correctly that this is something that women really struggle with as to whether or not they are going to go through and get an abortion. And the reason that that is a struggle, the reason it is difficult, the reason there is some cognitive dissonance is because God designed women in such a way that they are supposed to protect their children, even if it costs them their own life. And instinctively, human beings with even a modicum of common sense understand that the baby is still a baby, even when it's in the womb. And because of that, and because that cognitive dissonance exists, and because they know that it's their responsibility as mothers to protect their children, yes, it's very difficult and painful, and it's something that in many cases haunts them for the rest of their life because they know it's human. And that's the question that nobody on that panel asked. Because I think Chris is right about that. But the question is, why is he right? Chris Cuomo unwittingly just made a pro-life argument. He asserted that this baby really is a human being because he was saying that there is a level of remorse that comes with the decision to have an abortion. And this is a painful, difficult decision to live with, specifically because of that. So a little bit later in the clip, you'll hear Christine Quinn, the other person, the lady there that is on that panel, say that, no, the baby isn't human, which again, we just discussed. Accidentally, Chris Cuomo made the case that it was. But Christine Quinn sitting there saying, no, you don't understand. The baby is not a human. That is part of her body. This is about her having bodily autonomy. This is about her having agency over her body. And that is part of her body. It's not a human. So the baby's not a human, then what is it? What is it? How do you identify a human? This is another question that would have been really good to ask at this point. How can you define human being? Because I guarantee you they will not be able to come up with one that does not include children in the womb. If you take a zygote, a fertilized egg after the point of conception, and you were to extract the DNA out of the nucleus of that cell, and you were to put it under a microscope and do DNA testing, you would find that it is human DNA. It's not a cheetah. It's not an elephant. It's not a whale. It's not a crocodile. That is human DNA. And it is human DNA that no other human in the world has. Unless, of course, you happen to have a twin. That would be the only exception. If you have an identical twin, yes, another person does have that DNA, and we would still think of those two as two completely distinct people. But nonetheless, that is not the mom's DNA. It's not the dad's DNA. That is a completely unique human genetic signature that you will have for the rest of your life. Every single cell in my body has a nucleus filled with DNA that has not changed since the time I was born. Some of the sequences may have been turned on or off, when you're going through things like puberty, but the point is the genetic sequence is still the same and always has been. And it will be until the day I die. If they dig my body up in 10,000 years, find my remains, and do a DNA test on me, they'll say, yep, that's him. His DNA didn't change from the point that he was conceived until now. So this thing isn't a gorilla or a whale or a crocodile or a space alien. We would concur that that is human DNA. And it's human DNA that is completely distinct from the mother or the father. And so she asserts somehow that this is part of the woman's body. But if it has its own unique genetic signature, how can that be true? Is my arm your arm? Well, no. Well, how can you tell it's not my arm just because it's attached to your body? Well, my arm has a completely unique genetic signature. Oh. So, in other words, your body's not part of my body. You're a different human than I am. Why? Because of our DNA. And also because it happens to be attached to me and I can control it and you can't. But the point here is there's no way logically or biologically that you can assert this is a part of a woman's body. Common sense tells you this. You don't have to have an advanced degree in genetics. Are you really going to tell me, because body parts develop pretty early, most of them in the first trimester when it comes to pregnancy, are you really going to sit there and tell me that the mother has 20 fingers, 20 toes, 4 lungs, 4 eyes, 2 hearts, 2 brains, 2 nervous systems? And let's also look at the behavioral part of this. Very early on, the babies are already moving and thinking on their own. They're making their own decisions on their own actions. Every function of my body is controlled by my brain. Right now, as I'm sitting here before you, every single action going on in my body is something my brain is telling the rest of my body to do. Even involuntary muscle movements like my breathing or my heartbeat, they are all ultimately controlled by my brain. I may not be aware or conscious of them, but the point is my brain is doing the lifting there. My brain is the one sending those electrical signals to my body and causing my body to do those things. That's not the case with a baby. When a mother is pregnant, there is a separate brain inside her body, her baby's brain, that is telling its body to do those things. Obviously not breathing, because it's not breathing yet. But the point is, its heartbeat and all of its other involuntary muscle functions, those are taking place automatically. And so are the voluntary ones, where the baby moves around or kicks, when the baby pushes against the uterine wall, the wall of the womb, and the mother can feel it moving. That's not the mom doing that. That's not her brain controlling that function. And so how can you say that it's her body? It's not her body. It's very clearly the body of another person living inside of her. And on the whole thing about having, 4 arms and 4 legs, and let's also think about this. Let's say her baby is male. Are we to suggest there that she has male private parts? Because the baby does. And if that's part of her body, then I guess you would have to say that she is both male and female. The transgender people have finally figured out a way for someone to be neither male nor female. Just say that the male babies growing inside pregnant women, to say that they're male and female because they have both parts. This is insane. No logical, clear-thinking person would ever assert that this child growing inside the mother is a part of her body. And let's also remember that not only can the baby move independently of its mother's will, in other words, no matter what the mom's brain does, the baby can move its hand or move its leg. Let's also remember that the baby has its own sleep schedule. Babies in the womb, they can sleep. And they don't necessarily sleep at the same time as the mom. I had a family member that just recently was pregnant, and she was talking about this, how they did an ultrasound and couldn't really see very much because the baby was asleep. But nonetheless, it has its own sleep pattern, and it also has its own thinking, its own independent movements. It has its own thought. One of the things that they're really concerned about now, which is a good thing, they say that babies start learning language before they're even born, that they already recognize their parents' voice, that they can distinguish them from other people by the time they're born because they learned all that stuff while they were in the womb. So they're already thinking, they're already learning, they already have their own sleep patterns, their own independent movements. How can you in any way assert that that baby is a part of the woman's body? It's certainly connected to the woman's body. It's certainly dependent on the woman's body, but it's not a part of the woman's body. And by that logic, nursing children would be in the same boat, because nursing children connect themselves to the mother's body to receive nourishment, and they are definitely dependent on their mother to be able to survive. Are you going to say that their life is of less value now because they are dependent upon the mother? That doesn't make any sense. Are you going to assert that that baby is a part of the woman's body just because it relies on her body to survive? Again, doesn't make any sense. But just for the sake of argument, because of course this show is tactics, and we're talking about debate tactics here, let's play along with their argument. Let's assume that their argument is correct. Let's assume that this baby really is a part of the woman's body. Let's ask some follow-up questions. If the baby is really a part of the woman's body, if that's really what's going on, then let's go back to the original question we were talking about. Why is there a mourning period? Why is it that the mother feels distraught about the baby no longer being with her? Why is this a decision that they have to live with for the rest of their life, and in many cases, something that they look back on and regret? Why is that the case? Because I can tell you right now from experience, when they removed my tumor, I was thrilled. No remorse. I mean, I missed the body part that it was connected to, but I don't miss the tumor. It was causing me a great deal of pain, and it was endangering my life. I don't miss it. Not at all. If you've ever had your tonsils or your appendix taken out when they were causing you some kind of great pain, You don't really miss it. You don't mourn for it because you realize it's not a life. Now, if you lose your hand or lose something that you use every day, okay, I get that there's a little difference there, but you still don't recognize it as being a human life. You still don't recognize that there was something immoral about that taking place. And so that's one big point there, but also let's just assume from the medical perspective. Let's ask that question. Let's say that it really is a part of your body, that it's an organ just like every other part of your body. Is it okay for a doctor to just open up a healthy person and take out a completely healthy organ? Is it okay for them to remove a lung or a kidney? Just get rid of it? If a person walks into a doctor's office and says, "Doc, I really want you to amputate my arm," is that okay? Is that something that any sane doctor would do, to just cut off a perfectly healthy part of your body? No. We would say that that's mutilation. We would say that that's completely unethical. And we would say that that person is crazy for wanting that to take place. So even if you did assert that it was part of the woman's body, that's still not a very good case for abortion being legalized. Because any doctor worth his salt, if somebody were to come in and say, "I want you to remove this completely healthy part of my body," that doctor is going to look them in the eye and say, no. If you have some kind of medical complication, if your appendix is about to bust and that could cause you to die from infection, okay, then we'll talk. But I'm not just going to start taking healthy body parts out of your body. That's mutilation. And no doctor with even a hint of ethics would consider doing something like that. And so really, no matter how you come at this angle, anybody that's taking a stance that this is not a human life independent of the mother, with its own body, its own brain function, its own thoughts, everything else, is being completely anti-logic and anti-science. And it doesn't make any sense. This is nothing but drivel, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Our chaplain's report today comes from the book of Daniel. And to get you kind of caught up, if you haven't been following our series on the book of Daniel, King Darius has issued a decree, which, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, cannot be revoked, not even by him. Not even he can say, "Whoops, messed up there, got to take that decree back." Nope. Law of the Medes and the Persians suggests that once the king has signed it, that is law, and not even he can change it. So he issued this decree at the behest of his advisors, who really hate Daniel, to make any kind of praying or any kind of petition to any god other than King Darius, that person is going to be thrown into the lion's den. And because he allowed his own pride to get the better of him, he kind of signed it without really thinking about the implications of it. And as we're about to see here, he knew that Daniel was somebody that prayed every day. But he was so ready to accept the terms, he was so ready to do this to boost his own ego, that he didn't think about the consequences. And because of that, he was tricked into this. And Daniel did exactly what he's always done. He kept the windows open in his house like he always did, and he prayed 3 times a day. And the advisors, knowing that this took place, went over to his house, saw him, went to the king, said, "King, he's violating your law, and you've already written it into law that whoever does has to be thrown to the lion's den." What's interesting to me, though, and I think that this really does show some backstory, some character development that we didn't see from the very early part of this story. King Darius is really distraught. I mean, he's not just a little upset. And this is not somebody that is just really concerned for a coworker. It's very abundantly clear by looking at his reaction in the scripture that King Darius is somebody that really cared about Daniel. Daniel was somebody that was important to him. And yet, Daniel's life is now put into peril because of an action King Darius took. And we're going to kind of see a little bit of that reaction and what happens to Daniel in this next verse. If you'll look at Daniel chapter 6, verses 16 through 18, where he writes, Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace, and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and sleep fled from him. Looking at this story, because we often look at it from Daniel's perspective, and we ought to, he is the main character. But for a moment, look at it from the king's perspective. Can you imagine living with the guilt, living with the situation, knowing that your actions, a decision that you did, and in the king's place, he was the only one that had the power to do this. He was the only human in the world that could have pulled this off, and he's the one that did it. That your actions put a dear friend's life in danger. That because of your own pride, because of your own conceit, because of your own desire to lift yourself up, out of that was born an action, and you should have known better, that caused your friend's life to be in peril. That you might lose someone you love, lose someone that you care about, because of your own pride. Once you think about it that way, it's not real hard to understand why King Darius was so upset. It's not real hard to see yourself in King Darius. And so, while I think that it's always appropriate for us to look through the book of Daniel from the perspective of him, I think it's also really healthy for us to look through the lens of King Darius. And to remember that we need to keep our pride in check, because otherwise we could really hurt people. And this was an example of that, where King Darius really hurt Daniel, even though he didn't want to and didn't mean to. It was never his intention, signing that law, that Daniel would be on the receiving end of that law's wrath. And yet he didn't think it all the way through, and his actions were done carelessly. So, knowing that, you can kind of see why King Darius is so distraught, why he fasts and can't sleep, and the reason that he devotes himself all night to worrying about Daniel and what's going to happen to him, because he knows that he's the reason that Daniel's in the position that he is now. And yet, I think that it's significant that even King Darius has faith in God. Look at that quote from the first verse that we read in verse 16. Your God, this is King Darius speaking, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. So King Darius, he knows the kind of person Daniel is. He knew that this was a guy that prayed 3 times a day. He knew that this was a man that was devoted to God's cause in every aspect of his life. Look at the way that he worded that. He says, your God, whom you constantly serve. This guy knows Daniel is real serious about God. That he takes it very seriously, and it is an integral part of who he is. That he never stops ceasing. He never stops serving God. That is the focus of his life. And because of that, Daniel's faith is so strong and so pure that it inspires faith in King Darius, a pagan. That King Darius sees his commitment and says, well, surely the God that Daniel serves is going to protect him. He is going to deliver him from this situation. So he not only had faith that God had the ability to save him from the lion's den, he also had faith that God was going to. That he not only could do it, he was willing to do it. So we see a very strong faith stronger probably than most of the Israelites that we've seen in the biblical narrative up until this point, in a pagan, because of how strong Daniel's faith is. Now, the faith of others can't save you. And the faith of others is not going to be something that necessarily brings you into a right relationship with God, but it's a good starting point. And that's what we see right here with Daniel, in a faith that we should try to emulate. We saw how strong Daniel's faith was in verse 10, where despite knowing that his life was going to be forfeit, if he continued to pray to God, he did it anyway, did it exactly the way that he had done before. And like I said yesterday, that is the kind of faith that inspires people. That is the kind of faith that a leader is supposed to have, so that others can emulate that faith. And we see the fruits of it right here. Even a pagan like King Darius sees the faith of Daniel and says, if he's serving God like that, his God has the power to do anything. If this is somebody that devotes himself to serving God the way that he does, surely his God is going to protect him. Darius had a pretty strong faith in God, even though he didn't really understand it. Daniel's faith was the reason that Darius had reason to believe himself. And I imagine that, especially after this episode, that Darius had a better relationship with God because of Daniel and because of the way he conducted himself. Even Darius, at this point, has a lot of confidence in God's divine providence. But you'll notice, too, that the king got exactly what he wanted. The king wanted a decree to where nobody else was going to declare any kind of petition to anybody other than him, again, to puff up his own pride, and he got exactly what he wanted, and he realized it wasn't really what he wanted. That's why it's we need to be so careful about what we want, because sometimes we'll get it, and we'll realize that really wasn't the thing that we wanted. Luckily, Darius had enough faith in Daniel's God to try to overcome that. And I think that it's important for us to note this as well. Daniel was a servant of God. He was somebody that chose to walk with God and chose to follow him. Every Christian worth his salt eventually goes through the lion's den. It just happens. Might be a divorce, might be the death of a loved one, might be the death of a child, could be some kind of natural disaster, could be some kind of great trial, something that's very difficult to overcome. In my case, it was cancer. And there may be other great trials out there. I don't know. I don't know what God has in store for me. But the point is, everybody has a lion's den. And you've got a couple of choices. You can either trust God to bring you through it. You can believe that God is going to be the thing that delivers you. Or you can try to figure it out on your own. And I do not recommend the second option. You see, when I was going through my lion's den, the only thing that got me through it is being surrounded by people of strong faith. And the faith that I had myself. It was the only thing that gave me the strength to continue to carry on. And people that have been through the lion's den, they know what I'm talking about. Because Daniel was in a situation that he should not have survived. Daniel was in a situation that no matter how hard he tried or what he did, he was not going to succeed without God's help. And a lot of us are put in those situations. I was. I was put in a situation, and I'm sure that a lot of you out there have as well. You get put into a situation that there is absolutely no logical explanation whatsoever for how you got out of that situation unless God's hand was there guiding you. That's where Daniel is right now. And being in that position, falling into the hands of a loving God, is the best position you can be in. Because once you've emerged from it, it makes you aware of how dependent you are on God, how much you need him. And it does strengthen your faith in who he is and what he can do. You see, when you go through that lion's den, that's where you find out how strong your faith really is. And sometimes you find out it's pretty strong. Sometimes, if you're like me, you find out it wasn't nearly as strong as you thought it was. But that's the point where you fall on God and trust that he's going to bring you through it. You see, when we do enter that lion's den, we essentially have two options. Are we going to trust God? Are we going to believe that he can rescue us? Or are we going to rely on our own understanding and try to solve the problem ourselves? I'm not saying you don't work towards the resolution of the problem. I'm not saying you don't fight to get through it. I'm just saying that there is a difference in the emphasis and the mindset that you have as to whether or not, okay, I'm going to solve this problem on my own, or I'm going to trust that God is going to be the thing that gets me through it. And in this situation, we see both Darius and Daniel trusting that God is going to be the one that delivers. Daniel's faith inspired faith in his friend. And that's the kind of faith that all of us need to have. And that's the kind of faith that usually only comes after going through a lion's den. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.